John Lee here, welcoming you to a check-in episode with an Irish stew friend who has gone boldly where few of us have gone before. We talked to NASA astronaut Cady Coleman back in early 2022, and now she returns to discuss her compelling new book, Sharing Spaces, An Astronaut's Guide to Mission, Wonder, and Making Change. Cady Coleman, welcome back to Irish Stew.
I am so happy to talk again. It was so fun last time.
Well, it's great to have you. And we were just catching up a little bit about what you've been up to lately before we went on air. And let's place you in Trinity College in that beautiful library where right now there's a large globe. I mean, a realistic depiction of planet Earth rotating at one end of that long, beautiful hall. And you're underneath it. Tell us what was going on.
So I thought it was the most perfect place to be on Culture Night in Dublin, actually celebrating 100 years of American-Irish diplomatic relations. But having that globe right above us, and I was with Dr. Nora Patton, who is the first Irish woman to be selected to go to space. And she's going with the Virgin Galactic folks. And she's an aerospace engineer, has her PhD, and she'll be doing different kinds of experiments. I think with the idea, hopefully, that many of them come from Ireland. These are Irish experiments, and she'll be their shepherd. And so there we were in the library, having that globe overhead just reminds you that this world belongs to all of us. And whether we're exploring on Earth or we're exploring in space, the fact that we all come from different places, and that's what makes us different, but it's also makes us exactly the same.
Well, let me take you into the world of the book that we're talking about here. We'll thread Ireland in any place it feels right. The book is Sharing Space. It's an astronaut's guide to mission, wonder, and making change. We know you just came back from Ireland, but I'm going to send you up to the International Space Station.
Okay.
You're back up there.
So these are two of my favorite places right now, okay?
Trinity Library and the space station. Pretend you are one of the astronauts who arrived on the Boeing Starliner for a 1-week stay back in June, and you're told you actually won't be coming back until sometime in 2025, about 9 months later. What's your reaction?
Well, you have to seem a little pained and regretful because, actually, your reaction inside, I cannot speak for them, for Butch or for Sonny.
But for you.
Oh, but for me,
for your reaction, how would you react to that? You're up there.
I cannot believe I won the lottery. That here I was scheduled to only do an 8-day mission. I was assigned, this is now Butch and Sonny, assigned to be the shepherds of that new capsule, that second way up to space that's so important. And it's such an important job. And the mission dictated that their mission would be 8 days. That was the best way to have sorted out all the stuff, know that the ship is ready to go for mission after mission, and bring it back home soon, use the spacecraft for what it was meant for, bringing people and stuff up and down. So short mission, which is great for everything except for the people on board who, they're trained astronauts, and to be up there, there's so much work to do. And you know it the minute you arrive that your two hands with your head that knows how to do stuff in space is invaluable. So it's what we live for, I think, once trained. And I think it's hard on your family to know that you're going to be gone for longer. Butch mentioned in an interview that he'll miss his daughter's being a senior the last year in high school, before university. And it's not like if there's something really wrong, you can't be on the phone literally with her, but there's those kind of everyday things where you notice a certain look and you might ask what's up and you might just be there for the person. And so you do miss some things. And the same for Sunny and her husband. But I actually worked really hard in my commentary on the news to make sure people knew that we shouldn't say stranded. We shouldn't say stuck. We shouldn't say any of those S words because, first of all, it's game changing for the space station itself in terms of the work that we can do on it up there. It's like a giant old house, so to speak, where there's a lot of chores that are never exactly the most important ones. And for me, it would be, I live in a 200-year-old farmhouse in Massachusetts, and water runs through the basement. It's what happens in those old farmhouses, right? And we think, well, maybe we should do some reinforcing some of this or that. Maybe we should move stuff out of the basement. Maybe we should reorganize everything in the attic. And now that Butch and Sonny have been two extra people up on the space station, basically new experimenters, new scientists, new astronauts are basically boarding a space station that is like taking that 1800s house and suddenly the basement is ready for experiments. The attic is ready. I mean, it's really changed the face of it, and so much more work will be done because of the extra work that they managed to do over the summer. That's a long answer, I know, John. I'm sorry.
No, 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 no. I think I heard Butch say something like this. Well, we train for the unexpected. He seemed completely non-phased.
That's a great reminder because when he was talking like that, what it made me I've been telling people, "Don't say stranded," or whatever, but what he's saying, he says, "If this is what happens, if suddenly things happen and this situation is this way, well, this is where I start from, and I do my work from there. I do the mission from there." And so if stranded is where you start from, then you build from there. You acknowledge that it comes with some sorrow and some loss, and at the same time, it's okay to be really excited about being in the place that you are.
Well, a couple of the images that we saw of the astronauts brought to mind the cover of your book. And you're in a bright red t-shirt here, and your earrings are at a 90-degree angle, and your hair is floating free. And as a lapsed art historian, I look for meaning in pictures. And after reading the book, there's a lot of meaning in this photograph. I don't think it was chosen just because it was a cool picture.
Oh, I'm so glad you noticed that. It's true. I actually have a number of big hair photographs, big space hair, because that's what your hair does. I did tie it up sometimes when it might be in other people's way, but I like the fact that just because I happen to have longish kind of hair, it actually speaks, even when I'm in the corner of a picture, somebody down here on Earth that has grown up thinking that their horizon might be limited to staying on Earth can see that in the corner and be like, wow, well, women are up there. And I just think it raises people's horizons to realize if women are there, I'll bet you they can be anywhere. And that would be exactly true. So it's on purpose, that kind of subliminal, but also on purpose, I picked a picture that really showed you that I was in space because the ones inside the cabin can look a little bit like I might just have a lot of hairspray and I chose to be sideways or that they flipped the picture around or it's hard to show that you're in space. And so having that earth in the background with that curve there, it's just, there's all those elements. But I'd say the most important element is that I wanted to make sure that this book actually created ripples literally around the world, even if people never opened the book. I want them to be able to walk by on have it on a table or on a shelf, and I want it to just speak to them to say, "Wow, somebody did that. Somebody was in space." And men and women.
You're just beaming in the picture. It couldn't look happier. And I know the red shirt is a conscious choice, the colors.
Do you mean just because? Actually, first of all, it's my favorite color?
No, makes a better picture. It's not dull and drab. It's
Well, you're exactly right, because in finding ones, there's actually a really great picture where I have my flute in the picture, and yet, if you saw that book, you might wonder, is that a music book? Is that a memoir? What is that?
mm,
It might be distracting, so that picture couldn't go. And I actually brought a number of objects, as you know, up to space with me. For example, the Irish flutes and the flute and the whistle. And in a way, is it going to be about Irish flutes? Is it going to be about my high school? Is it going to be about the fact that I care about Children's Hospital? All those pictures with something else is a little bit distracting. And so it had to be a pretty careful choice, but I do actually love it very much, and I'm glad you do too.
sounds like you're touching on your missions in writing this book. And I could almost have gone through the book just picking out the subheads and the headlines, the chapter headings,
We
and
tried
use
to be
that.
clever.
Uh, yeah, no, it's organized beautifully.
This was a family project, by the way. The headlines, I sent them out to my siblings, and anybody have anything? And it was great.
You spoke right up front about Sally Ride
Mhm.
and how meeting her gave you permission to think about embarking on this direction in life. It could happen.
Exactly. I grew up in a family with a, wonderful mom, wonderful dad, and our dad was an explorer. He was a deep sea diver that helped with the habitats or like capsules living under the sea. So men in this case living under the sea. And I just grew up thinking that was normal. But when I see pictures of his work, I see guys in them, right? When I see pictures of the Mercury 7, I see guys, and I have great respect for all those people, but it doesn't necessarily make a 8-year-old, 9-year-old girl think, "Oh, this could be me." And so it really was a discovery when I met Sally Ride and saw her talk, and the fact that we are about the same height, we have dark hair, and just there's something that's a little bit similar. And not everybody needs that permission. And I don't think we should need it. But I think there's a lot of other messages that come along that tell you how people would prefer or get used to you behaving. And I don't mean that I was ever forbidden to, behave or choose a path, or that my dad was actually discouraging, because he was not. It was more, he kind of like slowly gained in wonder. Like, wow. Actually, there's a woman Navy diver named Heidi Stephanischen Piper who was chosen from the Navy. And I think that my dad, he was gone by then, but they're always a community. And I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't doubt that he went back there and said, so we might continue to kind of look a little wider, because we might have been missing like 50% of the population in our searching.
That comes up very strongly throughout the book, the idea of spreading this sharing space. Throughout the book, you're sharing space and you want to share with more people, different gender diversity, ethnicity, national origin, people with disabilities, different sizes of people as you encounter by being a smaller person
Hmm.
fitting into a medium-sized spacesuit.
It's true. And that's actually one of the most important chapters to me personally, in that I loved my work there at NASA. I loved the people that I worked with. But that doesn't mean that it was an organization that always saw me. I mean, it's funny, many astronauts end up, it turns out that if you really talk to a bunch of us, many of us wish to name our books The Unexpected Astronaut. So I think there's a certain, how could it possibly be that me, with all of my parts and pieces, some of which are not perfect, could be chosen for this amazing job? But there is a tradition that it's been predominantly male, and there's more and more women. When I was there, something in the sort of 10 to 15%. And now the astronaut office is 40% women, which I think is pretty neat. But at the time, even some of my best friends just would not necessarily see me as like, oh, yes, we should select her for that. And it's actually one of the, I think, interesting folks that are included in the book are people whose stories I told who helped me, who were guys. And there's a lot of what I learned about how to be present for my family when I was off training or off on the space station that came from the guys that I was training with. Chris Hadfield in particular, but there are others like him, Tom Akers, different people who were greatly respected by the management, maybe even part of it. And at the same time, could see people who were a little bit different. And when the question came up, could we make Cady a Capcom in mission control? They were like, she talks a lot.
For a brief explanation for our
Ah,
listeners what a Capcom
a
is.
Capcom is a capsule communicator, and that's the person in mission control that you hear talking. And almost always, and for many years, it was an astronaut, partly because you'd be able to have some empathy for the people up in space, that when they say, hey, we can't do this, they're not saying, we don't want to do this. They're not saying, we don't feel like doing this. They're saying, you need to realize this might take 2 hours and you only allocated 20 minutes. So that empathy is important. And being a bridge, because you also work in mission control, you are one of the many people that work for the flight director. And you're between that machine and the spaceship up in space that has your friends up there. And so being one of the communicators, and basically Chris made the point that we're building a space station, and our communications should not be limited to copy and Roger, right? And people who can see a whole group and understand how the whole team is doing, of which I think known to be a person like that, those kind of people are great bridge builders in mission control. So I like to emphasize that maybe people will look at the cover of the book and think, well, I wonder if this is all about women. And it's just simply not. And all of us, I think, play a role in making sure that people's voices are heard, to be able to help them contribute what they have to contribute, whether it's to sustainability, something in their community, their stories, whether they're music or books. Anyways, you know me, John, I'm a long talker.
Yeah. That comes up a few times in the book, and I appreciate some of the learning about I think it was called the boy apology.
Oh, well, that is pretty fun. Some cultural kinds of things. My friend who's a surgeon taught me that one, where a mistake happened and someone did something that was fairly rude and incorrect and it had consequences for me. And I expected that they would come to me and say, I'm really sorry that I made that mistake because it really had consequences for you. And I'm glad we have it straightened out, but I'm sorry. And I saw them in the hallway the next day and they said, Katie, we all have to get our flight time. It's getting to be the end of the month. You really might want to jump on these empty back seats in the T-38 because they just became available and you'll be able to get the rest of your flight time. And that's what this person said to me. And I'm thinking, where's my apology? And my friend Mary, renowned surgeon, explained to me, Katie, that was the apology, the boy apology. You're not going to get what you want. You have to realize that's what they can give you.
Live and learn.
It's true.
One thing that came out very kind of aware of it, but I didn't really focus on until reading your book is how much of your overall mission is spent on the ground and how much of your time is spent training, working on other missions, doing things like flying jet planes and making sure you have enough hours every year. What is it that people don't understand about the arc of the career of an astronaut?
I think that I've realized this some in writing my book as I would talk about the individual missions that I was on and what it took, how all of us who were so different coming together, making one mission work. It's the mission itself that brings you together. But then I realized I was on these different missions and that even though I don't work there anymore, I am still very intent on the fact that I can make a difference in who feels like what they have inside them can be useful in the world. They can feel free to bring it. And that other people might have to help them do that by being receptive, encouraging them if they might not have been encouraged in their background. And so I realized that this idea of a sense of mission that then helps you do hard things together is something that's blended my whole life together. And that's where, when I tell people that I worked for NASA for 24 years and I went on two missions to space in the space shuttle. So that was about 20 days. And then I spent 159 days on the space station out of 24 years. That's a long time. And yet it's really a journey of continuous learning and learning enough to figure out what is the piece in this big mission that I, as an individual, can play, not because I want the credit, but because what's the missing piece that I could serve? What is the thing that I could bring up that everybody's either worried about or doesn't see? That tends to be something that I sort of do. I feel like I spent 24 years learning new things and that I could sit on literally any airplane with any book, magazine, or other person and learn something that would make me be a better astronaut.
The book to me works on many levels. It's a great read if you're interested in space travel. You're going to learn things that you never knew before. There's a lot of great color of the folks you're up there with, some great stories along the way, your own story of perseverance and excelling at so many things. But I hate to use the term self help, but it kind of functions as a self help book too. The way it's structured, you're learning all this great things about a mission. You're learning about the challenges. You're learning about the people involved, the goals, and all that. And then there's like a kind of break where you are reflecting on what have we learned from
Hmm.
the last chapter
Hmm.
or section. Talk about how this can be used on a personal level, on an organizational level, what you've learned in space.
There's a couple of reasons why I chose to write the book in this way. And first of all, I felt like I learned a lot of things that are really quite useful, especially in the area of team building and leadership. In my work as an astronaut, you get exposed to a lot of people that are tilting against windmills that are really challenging, like climate change and changing the way we live and work to include more people. And these things are really big problems. And even the technical problems that we have, they're so interdisciplinary. And I see learning and understanding the team that you have and realizing that you probably don't know enough about them is a really big lesson. So there's that aspect of what's useful in any organization. But I think it's important in terms of people who have ambitions that they themselves have something to bring to the world. Many of them think that the people that they see up on a stage must have always been confident, always knew everything, and that they would have no lessons to share that had to do with they themselves making a mistake. That they see astronauts as superheroes with superpowers. And I think that we bring certain skills, each of us. But I think that one thing the book can give people is that if they realize that I'm not a superhero and they think that, well, maybe I'm not a superhero either, they think, but that if she's not either, then that means that, well, maybe I can do the great things that I think I might have inside me. So I think that's important.
No, I was gonna say, like a good chemist, as you were by training, at one point you say insecurity is a catalyst for accomplishment.
For me, it really was where it's just not always my way to be totally confident that I'm the best at this or I have all the ideas that we need. And so I'm often asking. And I think that when people actually then honestly underestimate me, partly my fault for acting not as sure, okay, but partly maybe through the lens through which they see me. But when I realize that they actually are really thinking, boy, we don't really particularly need what she brings, I'm like, really? And it brings out this little, well, then I think I'll have to make sure I show you. And it actually helps me stand up for myself, what I really do know, what I really bring. And so it's this lack of confidence sometimes can be actually a catalyst to actually showing myself and others what I can really do. The last dimension to the book, and one that I think is actually the most important, is that this book candidly shares me working and living in a world where I really loved the work. I felt so strongly about the mission. I really loved the people that I worked with. And yet it's not a perfect place. And it's still a place that can, in its very sort of the pressures that are on NASA and their partners to be part of this very difficult arena exploration, sometimes the very imperative nature of needing to know you've really picked the best person can cause you to pick the people that you're comfortable with. And in this world of space exploration that is supposed to be the place that must be just the top of everything, if those mistakes, because it is a mistake to leave people behind, if those mistakes happen in that world that we all aspire to, that means that it can happen anywhere, that people are overlooked or not seen because they're a bit unexpected. And that's really the big lesson is that if it could happen in the space program, it could happen everywhere around you, and it does. And all of us then, I hope, will find a part in my book that shows you maybe some things that you can do to help that situation.
Well, Katie, I think that's a great place to take you away from space for a moment, get you on a plane. Let's go to Ireland and find out what happened to you over in Ireland. I heard you had a great trip. You were there for a really significant reason. We started off with you in Trinity College, but you had a nice trip before that.
I certainly did. Right off the plane, took a nap, which was good, right? And drove to the ploughing, which many Irish folks know, but back at home, you probably don't know. This should be like the state fair, but it's for the whole country. And John, I don't know if you know how many visitors they typically get there, but it is tens of
Yeah,
thousands.
I think I saw 75,000.
And I mean, it's just an enormous number of people. There's acres of cars that are parked. And it's everything from tractor competitions or learning about the new things in agriculture, new techniques or old techniques you think might be, useful and people have forgotten about. The government is represented, your state governments are represented. If you have questions about your taxes, there's a competition about science that was highlighted where they had different young people right around high school, college. What ideas did they have for science projects? And one of them was had to do with I thought was amazing was looking at the soil samples that farmers are required to take to document how nitrogen is being taken up. And it's these 1 meter samples, and the data comes back a couple months later. It's not so useful. And these kids have figured out a way. Well, if we've been taking these 1 meter, 3 foot samples for this long that show the roots of the plant and how they're doing, now we can probably make some comparisons between if farmers just took a shovel of dirt and sent that off and took photographs of that, could we then use that to actually draw the conclusion of how the roots at the very bottom were doing? And so it just was a really clever thing. I got to see science like that. I talked to just all sorts of people who go all the time. I went on a day that the weather was extremely good, and apparently the plowing is known for being like just a mass of mud. So I was really pleased about that. But it was so much fun to be there. There was dancing, there was music, you name it, it was
I
there.
bet there were some sunburns coming out of that day too.
Oh, definitely. It's funny. I stereotyped and I thought, do I need my sunscreen in Ireland? And I left it at home.
Mm, rookie mistake.
It's true.
Where after that?
Well, someplace I had really been so wistful to go, which is Matt Malloy's
Uh,
pub in Westport. And I don't know if folks know, but we had talked a lot in our other recording about when you go to space, you get to bring some things with you, and there'll be some things that just help bring other people with you to space. And I brought a flute for Ian Anderson of the band Jethro Tull, because for me, he represented someone who brought the flute to rock music where it really hadn't been so present, gave me permission, so to speak, to be a flute player in that world. And then a band called the Chieftains, where Patty Maloney's son, Padraig, had been an intern at NASA. He's a nanotechnology person with his degrees in that. And so I met him through that. He met many of the astronauts through that. So we became friends with the band. And when they bring a local group up to play, that was one of the astronaut bands of which I was part of. So that led to bringing Patty's tin whistle and Matt Malloy's flute up to space. And so knowing like so many people would refer to the place where, when Matt's at home, that's where he makes music. And I'd always wanted to, I don't know, make these memories on the ground. And so for me, it was so wonderful to drive to Westport. And then actually the journey continued after that, but sit in the pub and maybe have a pint of Guinness because I'd been told it was, in America, we just don't do it right. Play a little music with Matt, which was really so fun. Play music with a really cool band in the back called After Eight that were so amazing with their just perfect harmonies and that sort of people together doing this exact thing that they're really just telling a story together with their voices. It happens in every language, it happens in every place. And Matt Malloy's pub really represented that to me. As well as just driving, I went to Atlantic Technical University to give a talk and talk to students there, and that's in Sligo. And here's these names that have been only for me tunes in a book. I'd see the names of things, and now suddenly those names are places. And they were explaining to me that if my last name is Coleman, then some of my heritage must be Sligo because the Colemans are responsible for music in Sligo. So I appreciated that. We went on to a planetarium in Armagh, and it was a very impressive place. I gave a talk there. We talked and just discussed astronomy and space and all those kinds of things. But just walking around the exhibits, I was so impressed. It's something that I'm kind of picky about. I will go to a museum, and as we're walking through, I don't want to just see what technical thing happened. I want to see the person that did it or the people that did it. Because science and technology, they are team sports. Lots of different people, and especially women and people of color, have been left out of these stories for so long. And in that museum there in Armagh, I saw so many great photographs or drawings of the actual people that made these discoveries. And it looked so much more alive. And even like they had a display of spacewalking and they showed Anne McLean. And they didn't just show a picture of Anne. They had a spacesuit glove, like this reaching out towards you. And so you can't just say, well, women do spacewalks too. Here's Anne's face and that glove. And you feel like, boy, they're about to reach out to me from space. So I was really impressed with that. And that so many kids will get educated there and leave through those doors with a different horizon. Let's see, Dublin City University we went to. I also spoke at the Center for Cross-Cultural Studies and talked about things that we'd done on my own crew, and there are things that are in the book as well, but the importance of just never stopping, trying to figure out who is that on my crew? That person who doesn't talk much, or that person who talks all the time and never stops. But have we really found out who they are? And if we knew what they could really bring to us, what would that mean for our team? And so that's what we talked about in terms of across borders, whatever they are. It's only people that can make the changes and actually change the world and the course of history.
And you talk about trust in the book, the importance of trust. You have trust versus friendship.
We had a crew, and actually all crews are, I think it's a little known fact that at NASA, at the different space agencies, the European Space Agency, around the world, doing things together it can be hard. And one of the reasons that it's hard is that we're all different people and we are never, I literally never picked because we would get along with each other. And it's expected that you're going to figure out a way to do the mission together. And so by being from so many different places, it really takes some hard work to do that. Um, I mean, there's no question you have to trust each other. And I thought at first I would just have to show them that I did good work, and then they could trust that I could do good work. But in some ways, they're going to have questions that they haven't asked me, that they're afraid to ask me. Katie, how's your experience? Are you feeling like we're picking on you because you're a woman? Or are we just pretending like everything is the same and yet your experience is clearly different? I personally find that a hard question to ask people. And so being vulnerable, saying to people, I'd like your help in figuring out when should we raise the flag and say, hey, asking me to do that would have been the right thing to do, but instead, automatically, that government asked those people on their team, not me. And those are hard questions. So, what I found was that by being a little vulnerable, showing them that I had questions myself, showing them that I missed my family, that's one of the things that really brought us together was the fact that not that we all have husband and wife or kids, but we all leave somebody behind. And that turns out to be the vulnerability that actually brings us together.
Back to Ireland, how did they feel meeting an astronaut?
I think they were excited. I mean,
I
I think,
am.
it's funny. Yeah. What I think a talk, often they see this, but the musicians already knew that we had something in common, right? And I would say to them, I don't know that many tunes. I usually play the silver flute and I play more improv. So I don't know that many Irish tunes. They're like, well, which ones? And they were so welcoming. Should the fact that they already knew we had something in common, they came right up and they gave me a whistle and it just was so nice of them. Someone else gave me a book that they'd found of tunes that they'd found that this is like a really great start. And so I think by talking about different things in my talk, especially family, I think it gives people to come up and ask their questions about even I'll talk and talk and talk. And then somebody will come up and they'll be like, but were you scared? And I want to tell them, I said, well, the thing I was the most worried about, I trust everyone to have done a good job. And if I can stay safe, I know that they've done their best to keep me safe. But it's not a safe thing to be going to space. It's never going to be really safe, right? But the thing that I worry about is that I would make a mistake that would affect an experiment that I'm doing, would make a mistake with the big $1.8 billion telescope that I helped launch, right? And I think they're surprised to find that you might be worried about that because they worry about making mistakes. So I had a lot of really great chats about all sorts of different things. Just to be sure I'm always pointing out the curve of the earth. Because I do actually still get people that tell me that they're just sure that the earth must be flat. And this is where it's the perfect opportunity. I lived there for 159 days. I looked out the window all the time. And I'm just going to tell you that it is round and it is beautiful. And then at least it's not just lines on a page, but a person helping them with their perspective.
One thing that took me by surprise in reading the book, there's an extremely important element of every astronaut's equipment, and that would be the spacesuit. And you would think these would fit like a glove, but you found there were none that fit you.
Well, and they're not made specifically for each person. This is the spacesuit that you would do the spacewalks in. And in order to be on the space station, you needed to be qualified for spacewalks because we'd be going up in groups of three and then form sort of six people up there. But basically, three of us from the US, Japan, Europe, and Canada had to, as a three-person crew, we needed two spacewalkers and a backup. And so it can't afford to not have a backup. So three people, all three had to be qualified. And that was problematic because a number of years before that, before we were going on the space station, they actually decided we're not going to be able to support all the sizes of spacesuits. We're going to not be able to do the small spacesuits, only the medium, the large, and the extra large. And actually, there used to be extra smalls too. So, meanwhile, there's a lot of people like myself, many of them women, about a third of the women suddenly did not have a spacesuit that fit them. And these suits that we use, I call it the Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man spacesuits. And they're really big. And if you're a small person, there's just a lot of air in there and you can't reach all the things. You're sort of like sloshing back and forth in this big giant spacesuit. And we do our training and where we show people we know how to do the different tasks as a spacewalker. We do them in a giant swimming pool. And so that giant air bubble in our case is always like pulling us towards the surface. And we're trying to do something down below and turn just a little bit. And just can be a big force, that big air bubble. And so the suit as something that was too big is something that I managed to master, not because I'm like Superwoman, but because I had a lot of help of people that wanted to figure out how to make this bad situation one that was tenable, where I actually was well trained and my marks in the spacesuit were above average, which I was quite proud of. And so above average, and I qualified in the spacesuit, and I got to go then to the space station. But if I hadn't managed that tough transition of leaving the small spacesuit that fit me behind, and a lot of people did help me with ideas to we would stuff it with padding, and I would look like a giant person with padding around the waist and under your crotch, and the things to make me tall enough and wide enough, and all those kinds of things. And so I think we're all proud of the fact that we made me and then other people using these techniques, we got to go to the space station. But without that help and that qualification, I would have waited 11 years to fly on the space station. In other words, from the time I was starting there, it would have been 11 years until we had the SpaceX capsule that has 4 seats. So now you can have 2 spacewalkers, a backup, and a person who could be the robotics expert or whatever. So to me, it's a chapter, it's in the middle of the book, but it's an important statement. When we think about how to make change, I either could have said, where's my spacesuit? You know how big I was when I got there, right? And how could you tell me, by the way, we don't have equipment for you to be part of the mission, right? It's a big deal. And so I ended up surmounting that with a lot of help. And yet, when you're thinking about that, do you just say, where's my spacesuit? Or it's more my way. And I think the better way in this situation, at least for me, was to go to the other end of that spectrum and find a way to communicate with the people who make decisions and judgments to help them understand A, why it was difficult, B, how important it was to find solutions, and have them realize that this is something that we really need to mitigate. Otherwise, we are losing so many important people on that space station.
Am I right that you took this approach after you had qualified?
No. So I'm saying that even in being considered, and they would hold spacewalking meetings, and I wouldn't know because it never showed up on my schedule. And it wasn't like they were like, oh, we don't want to invite Katie. It just never occurred to them that I was going to qualify in that suit and need to be at that meeting. But I knew I was going to do that, or at least I really hoped I would. Right.
Yeah.
And so, in order to get the help that I needed to have people be willing to really help me as much as they could. And so someone that really knows so much about the spacesuit and exactly how it needs to fit, I said, nobody knows as much about spacesuit fit as you do. And I need to have you on my team every time I go to get a suit fit. Because what if the people who are there don't know as much? They're going to say, yeah, we just can't make that work. Sorry. So I'm saying that by doing that, I'm speaking in a language that that person can understand about how I need their talents to make me better, to qualify in that spacesuit and go to space. But what you are also reading in the book is that once I did qualify, I tried so hard all the time, and I would pretend that I would be like, oh, here I go. And I'd be very confident. And hey, how many hours do we have left? Oh, only 3. Well, could we do this and this? We spend 6 hours usually in that spacesuit. And once I got selected, I said, I worked really hard to show my qualifications, but that doesn't mean that they were easy. And I want to show you what was hard for me in case together we can figure out a better way. And I'm very proud, and it's something people found unusual, but it's certainly, as a person on the team, I'm going to tell them what is going to be hard for me so they can help me do it. And what's, I think, really great and important is Tracy Caldwell, who's up there right now, up on the space station, is the person that came back from space and said, we need to change our spacesuit training because I don't think I was trained well enough. And it takes courage to say that. And she said that changed the spacesuit training, and people are being taught in a different way that involves them being really free to say, I'm finding this hard. How can you help me do it? As opposed to always feeling like you have to prove yourself or you simply won't get picked. And it wasn't that people were bad. It's just that it was the way, for some reason, spacewalking was the only thing that we treated that way. It's people just stepping back and seeing a guy on the pool deck in their spacesuit getting ready to practice and thinking, I wonder how he'll do. And a woman, more typically, I wonder if she can do that. And it was an important mindset that needed changed. And from what I'm seeing, they have changed it.
Well, Katie, let's leave our listeners with a few thoughts here in the shameless plug category. What should we plug away for you? Besides the book, Sharing Space, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about and to support?
As a person that does whatever you do, just take that time to look around, see who else is around you that has contributions to make and might not be recognized, might be somebody you need to say, hey, do you have something to say? Or if you say something and somebody else, says the same thing and everybody says, oh, that was a great thing. And you're the first person, find, notice that and say, so great that you amplified John's point. So be that ally for people. I think that, and just look around and realize that the future is literally under your feet. It is the kids, it is the teenagers, it is the college students, and it is adults your age, whatever that age is, and helping them have a wider perspective. And if you want somebody to be explaining more about that, I do public speaking as my shameless plug.
You be dynamite. I was talking to my wife about, would you be a great corporate speaker?
I do quite a bit of that.
Right.
And actually, I like knowing that you're that kind of change or that kind of encouragement to people who have ideas, but maybe haven't stood up for them. And because it wasn't that kind of environment, and me coming and bringing up a bunch of kind of things, elephants in the room.
Yeah.
When I leave, I think they get to talk about some things that were hard to talk about before.
And you weave it into such great storytelling. What's more compelling than stories about space? And then there's all these human stories that are very applicable that you're discovering as you go.
Well, thank you. I think we all go on some amazing journeys. And I think the storytelling part of it, whether it's music or the written word or any of these things, getting the help you need to tell important stories.
Well, Katie, you end on a very Irish note here, storytelling, the theme that comes up on Irish Stew so many times. But I'm going to end actually with a big disagreement I have with you. Bone to pick.
Uh-oh.
Page
Okay,
68.
I'm ready.
Page 68, you talk about all the people who make space travel possible, quote, because ordinary women and men like me trained for years to travel in space. We don't look at you as ordinary at all.
Well, thank you very much. I certainly have some traits that put me in that category. And you can ask my crewmates that. But I appreciate that. And I actually love that chapter. And I just think mission is it's a desire to have something important succeed. And I think we all have that feeling about different things. And realizing that power of mission is what can make you and a person very unlikely the exact perfect team to make something happen.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.